Hello, Rachel.
Hey John, how are you?
Good. I finally caught up to y'all.
Yeah.
A little bit of change. I just got a text from Gabrielle. I'm want to see what she's saying.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we haven't seen them in a while, huh? Are they doing good?
Yeah. Yeah, she said she'll make it next week.
Okay, good.
How have you all been?
Good. Good. Staying busy. How about you?
Well, I'll tell you what, we're ahead of the dog days of August. It's been really hot, really dry, and
Oh,
afternoon, it's not worthwhile going outside.
oh man. Yeah. How long is it? And that lasts all of August, and how long into
Well, let's
September?
hope not.
Okay.
Maybe a couple of weeks. It looks like the next 10 days are going to be like this.
Ugh.
But we always get some weather like this. I mean, there's no dodging it.
Yeah.
So, you got to do what you got to do.
Right. Find
But
some place cool to
that's
hang out.
right. I have the luxury of being able to try to get everything done in the morning and whatever I want to do in the morning, and then in the afternoon find something to do inside.
That sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah, like reading numbers.
Yeah.
Oh, there's Fred.
Yeah, hi guys.
Fred,
Fred, I made it.
You made it.
I,
Okay.
I navigated all this modern technology.
Right. The system is much more sophisticated now.
Yeah. I see Harold is here today too.
I'm here. Hmm.
Howdy, gang. How's it going? Oop. Let's try this again. Hey, everybody.
Hi,
Hey,
Chris.
Hey, Chris.
Rachel says if I lean back, I don't look like I'm in witness protection and you can actually see me.
You look like you're on vacation.
Oh no, I've been working my little keister off today. It's been a tough one.
Are you outside mostly, Chris?
No, I ride a desk most days.
Well, I got a note from Gabrielle. She was going to attend tonight, but she said she's got some other things she got going and she's going to have to make it next week. So she'll have to
okay,
do some catch up work.
okay. Well, I think everybody who's going to be coming is probably here, so we can go ahead and start.
Okay.
We're starting a new our new trial thing this week. Studying the parsha of the Torah for the upcoming Shabbat service. And so the one for this coming Saturday is actually the last section of the book of Numbers. We'll be completing the book of Numbers this Saturday. And so if you have your Bibles, it's the book of Numbers and chapter 32. So just to set the scene for this, this is sort of the end of the story of this whole desert odyssey that the Israelites have been on. They finally completed their 40 years. They've reached the plains of Moab just across the Jordan from Canaan, and they're ready to go across. These are sort of the final arrangements before Joshua was going to lead them across the Jordan. Um, Somebody want to go ahead and start reading, read the first 5 verses.
Sure. And the Reubenites and the Gadites had much livestock. very numerous. And they saw the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead, and look, the place was a place for livestock. And the Gadites and the Reubenites came to Moses and to Eleazar the priest and to the chieftains of the community, saying, Ataroth and Dibon and Jazer and Nimrah and Heshbon and Eliala and Sebem and Nebo and Beon, the land that the Lord struck down before the community of Israel is livestock land, and your servants have livestock. And they said, if we have found favor in your eyes, let this land be given to your servants as a holding. Do not make us cross the Jordan.
Yeah. And so, yeah, and this is kind of surprising. They basically what they're saying is we don't want to go we don't want to cross the Jordan into the promised land. We this is great land for our cattle. We just as soon stay here. Um, and this is kind of interesting because this was not part of a land that was promised to the children of Israel. Even the most aggressive settlers now, in modern Israel, don't claim the east side of the Jordan, any part of that, as part of Israel, and yet they are. They're claiming what eventually became called Gilead, a section east of the Jordan, which it really would roughly correspond to northern Jordan, on a modern map. And then starting with verse 6, you have Moses' response to that, and that goes from verse 6 through verse 15. If somebody wants to read that,
Brett, before we start,
yeah.
there's reference here to their at the land of livestock. Did that mean that there was already livestock there and people there, or did that mean it was just fertile land that they could graze their livestock?
I think it was just
Do you
what
know?
they're referring to as fertile land. I mean, obviously, it was taken away from from the Moabites. She read this list of all these cities.
Yeah.
Atoro, Dibon, Yazer. These are all cities that they had conquered on their way in. But Moses never intended them to live there. They would, there were people blocking their way in those cities, so they defeated them in battle. But the plan was just to move on to the Jordan and cross it. And here these guys, say we've conquered this land and it's a good place for our cattle, so we want to just stay here.
Okay, yeah, because I
Yeah.
was confused. I wasn't sure exactly what that was saying.
Mhm. So Moses' answer really is from verse 6 through verse 15. If somebody wants to read that.
Sure, I'll go ahead.
Okay.
But Moses said to the people of Gad and to the people of Reuben, shall your brothers go to the war while you sit here? Why will you discourage the heart of the people of Israel from going over into the land that the Lord has given them? Your fathers did this when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. For when they went up to the valley of Skol and saw the land, they discouraged the heart of the people of Israel from going into the land that the Lord had given them. And the Lord's anger was kindled on that day, and he swore, saying, surely none of the men who came up out of Egypt for 20 years, old and upward, shall see the land that I swore to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, because they have not wholly followed me. None except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua, the son of Nun, for they have wholly followed the Lord. And the Lord's anger was kindled against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness for 40 years until all the generation that had done evil in the sight of the Lord was gone. And behold, you have risen in your father's place a brood of sinful men to increase still more the fierce anger of the Lord against Israel. For if you turn away from following him, he will again abandon them in the wilderness, and you will destroy all this people.
Yeah. So basically what he's recalling is, it doesn't take 40 years to get from Egypt, to the banks of the Jordan. At most, basically they had reached the Jordan in 2 years after they got out of Egypt. And then you have that episode where Moses sends 12 spies, one from each tribe, to check out the land before they cross over. And the spies come back, and 10 of them say, it's a great place. Well, we can't do this. The people are giants. The cities are all fortified. We can never conquer this land. This was a big mistake. Maybe we ought to go back to Egypt.
Ooh,
And only two of them, and they list them here, Caleb and Joshua, are only two of the spies says, no, we can do this. God's with us. Let's go. And God is so angry at this that he said, you're just going to walk around really in circles in the desert until this generation is gone. So he taxed 38 more years onto this trip to the desert until this whole generation is gone. And what he's saying is, you're starting this whole thing all over again. Because Moses interprets it as they're cowards. They're afraid. They don't want it to participate in the fighting that's going to take to subdue the Canaanites. They just want to stay behind. They're afraid to cross over. This is his interpretation. And he said, "You're doing the same thing that the last generation did. You're going to make us do the same thing all over again." And then their answer to that, though, is in verses 16 through 19. So somebody read that.
Sure.
It's,
They approached him and said, "Pens for the flock shall we build here for our livestock, and cities for our small children. We shall arm ourselves swiftly in the vanguard of the children of Israel until we have brought them to their place, and our small children will dwell in the fortified cities before the inhabitants of the land. We shall not return to our homes until the children of Israel will have inherited, every man his inheritance. For we shall not inherit with them across the Jordan and beyond, for our inheritance has come to us on the east bank of the Jordan."
yeah. So what they're saying is, no, we're not afraid to fight. In fact, we'll go over and fight, with the other tribes. But when the fighting is over and you've conquered Canaan, we want to go back east of the Jordan, and claim this land for ourselves. So, we're not cowards. We're with our brothers. We just don't want to settle in the same place. We want to be on the east side of the Jordan. The other thing that I think the phrase that you read in the English was, we're going to go armed, swiftly armed in the vanguard with our brothers. And that phrase, actually, the Hebrew text is kind of weird because it reads Nechalates Hushim. And nobody really knows what that means, basically. The translation is kind of a guess. When it comes to translating the Hebrew Bible, some of the words are really just basic and easy. Words for man, house, tree, or see, speak, take. There's no problem with that. Then there are words that are less common. And so let's say it occurs 15 or 16 times in the Bible. So you get a concordance and find all the places where it occurs. And then usually by seeing the context it occurs in, you can get a pretty good idea of what the word means. But then there are words that only occur once in the Bible, and that's just really an educated guess. And the word Hushim, nobody knows what it means. It occurs once here and nowhere else. The other word, Nechalates, is kind of more interesting. It's going to occur 3 or 4 times in this reading. And the only other place in the Bible that it occurs is a couple of times in the book of Chronicles. And in both instances, it has something to do with fighting. And so it's usually translated as armed or ready for battle or something like that. Um, the interesting thing about it is that in the 19th century, the last couple of decades of the 19th century, when the first Zionists started going up into Palestine, the first Aliyah, they took this word for their own. They call themselves Chalutzim, which they translated as the advance guard, the people that go first, or the pioneers. And even in Israel today, the word is still used. I mean, it's hardly ever used in the Bible except in this one place and in Chronicles, but it's a common word in modern Israel and is used to refer to the initial pioneers, the first people who came to Palestine to build up the land again. And it's interesting that they should use a biblical word because most of the early Zionists that came with the first and second Aliyah were not religious people. But they knew the Bible. To them, the Bible was not a religious book; it was a nationalistic book. It was a history of their nation. They looked at it that way. And there's one actually modern Israeli historian who has said that the modern state of Israel was formed by a bunch of atheists who were inspired by the Bible, which in some ways is really true. I mean, most of these people were not believers. They were not very religious Jews, but they knew the Bible backwards and forwards. And they would take a word like this, chalatz, from this reading, and made it into one of their favorite words. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon. Okay. And
So-
then, yeah,
I was
Ron, you were
just
going
gonna
to say
say, so
something?
basically what's taking place is God speaking through Moses, and this was for over 40 years, is saying, hey, if you guys want to stay here on the east side of the Jordan, you're in violation of what I've promised you.
Yeah, this is not the land that I promised you. It may
This
be
is
good
not the
land.
land.
Yeah, but
Even though
it's
they
not
had
meant
to
to be your
fight their
land.
way through all these different communities.
Right. Exactly.
And
You
they
know,
had
this is
more fighting that they had to do once they crossed the Jordan.
right.
That was
Yeah.
the land, that was the land that God promised to them. And it took over that period of time for them to, what, 40 years to figure out they were going to follow what God has said, or 40 years of fighting among themselves to,
Well, supposedly this is the new generation, except for Joshua and Caleb. That generation has died out. And
yeah,
so supposedly this is a new generation born in the desert. And what Moses fears is, we're starting the same thing all over again. You're afraid to cross the Jordan, just like your fathers were. And
okay.
what they're saying is, no, we're not afraid. In fact, we'll go in the vanguard. We'll lead the fighting.
So it's really
We'll fight
just
with
that
our
simple.
brothers.
Okay,
Yeah, but when the fighting is over and you've won Canaan, we want to go back east of the Jordan. We like to land there better because it's
yeah.
better for our flocks and herds, essentially.
So
So
did
go
one
ahead.
second. So basically, Moses called them out and said, "Are you a bunch of cowards? Are you going to do the same thing that your fathers did?" And they're like, "Oh no,
Yeah,
no, we're better. We're going to go and fight in the vanguard and prove and basically like recapture our honor of our family." Is that
exactly. Yeah,
okay?
right.
Sorry,
Yeah.
John. Go ahead.
Okay.
I was just going
And
to say, so this really was a spiritual journey, and they weren't willing to follow through what it took to follow God's instructions.
Yeah. In other words, and the thing is, with the generation that left Egypt, when you think about it, I think later rabbis commented on this. This was a generation that didn't have to have any faith at all because they had seen the miracles. They had seen the plagues in Egypt. They had
Yeah,
seen the sea split. They'd
the
seen
sea
Pharaoh's
part. Yeah,
army, drowned. They'd seen the manna come down from heaven. It wasn't a matter of faith. I mean, the miracles were right there in front of them. And when they finally got it to the Jordan, they still doubted God. They still didn't believe, that God would lead them to defeat the Canaanites. And so, God has a pretty good case for letting this generation go.
yeah. Well, this all makes sense now. From the, when you think of we've always read about the 40 years in the desert. Now it all,
Mhm.
what we just kind of discussed, to me, it makes sense of what
Yeah.
was really taking place.
Yeah, I mean, it was basically 2 years to get to the Jordan, and then
Yeah,
38 years, which are basically just sort of punishment laps, just walking around,
yeah.
waiting for that generation to die off, and the next generation. The odd thing about it, the two good guys, the only two members of the 12 spies, were Joshua and Caleb.
Mhm.
They were the good guys, and they're allowed to go into the land of Canaan. And of course, Caleb, the name in Hebrew means dog. Kelev in Hebrew is a dog. And the odd thing is, though, animal names are very popular for men in modern Israel. Ari is a lion, Svi is a deer, Dove is a bear, Zev is a wolf. And yet you don't see any Caleb's for some reason. Dog is a name, but it's just not popular in Israel. And the Bible in general doesn't like dogs. Almost every time the dogs are mentioned in the Bible, it's kind of in a negative sense. Like if sacrifices are not eaten by the third day, you can't eat them anymore. Throw them to the dogs. Or in the Book of Kings, when Jezebel is killed, falls off a balcony, the dogs licked up her blood. And every time dogs are portrayed in the Hebrew Bible, it's just in a negative sense. They're scavengers, and whatnot. And when you think about it, I've always thought it was kind of weird because these people, are shepherds and herdsmen.
Mhm.
You really wonder, why didn't they do what the Europeans did, breed and train dogs to work with them? But you just don't see that mentioned in the Bible. I've always wondered about that.
Yeah, that's a good question, really.
So we don't have any historic evidence of the Israelites using dogs for herding.
It's not mentioned. You think they would mention it every once? They're always talking about their flocks and herds, and you think they say a good word for the dogs if they had dogs with it. They were working with them. The text suggests that they probably didn't for some reason.
Which would lead you to question, could they be that the dogs really weren't domesticated in the sense that we've domesticated
Could
dogs?
be, obviously there were dogs who the Bible does mention them, but the dogs they mention are always scavengers. You get the impression they're feral, wild dogs that have never been domesticated. And yeah, it could be for whatever reason, in the Middle East, dogs were just not domesticated the way they were in Europe.
Mhm.
I see a research paper coming.
Yeah. If anybody wants to research that before next week, that's homework for next week for anybody
Yeah,
who wants to
yeah.
volunteer.
How did Fido get to be Fido?
Right.
Right.
Okay. Well, you could Google that dogs in Middle East and see what turns up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Moses then has a reply to them, and the reply is verses 20 through 27. Actually, it's a long reply. It's verses 20 through 42. So it's kind of a marathon reading if anybody wants to volunteer for it.
Yeah, I'll truck through it. If I get cut out, wave because our connection's been kind of weird. So
Okay.
Moses said to them, if you do this thing, if you arm yourselves before the Lord for the battle, and every armed man among you shall cross the Jordan before the Lord until he drives out his enemies before him, and the land shall be conquered before the Lord, and then ye shall return, then ye shall be vindicated from the Lord and from Israel. And this land shall be a heritage for you before the Lord. But if you do not do so, behold, you will have sinned to the Lord. Know your sin that will encounter you. Build for yourselves cities for your small children and pens for your flock, and what has come from your mouth shall you do. The children of Gad and the children of Reuben said to Moses, saying, your servants shall do as my Lord commands. Our small children, our wives, our livestock, and our animals will be there in the cities of the Gilead. And your servants shall cross over, every armed person of the legion, before the Lord to do battle, as my Lord speaks. Concerning them, Moses commanded Eleazar the Kohen, Joshua son of Nun, and the sons of the fathers of the tribes of the children of Israel. Moses said to them, if the children of Gad and the children of Reuben will cross the Jordan with you, everyone armed for battle before the Lord, and the land is conquered before you, you shall give them the land of Gilead as a heritage. But if you do not cross over armed with you, but if they do not cross over armed with you, then they will take their heritage among you in the land of Canaan. The children of Gad and the children of Reuben spoke up, saying, as the Lord has spoken to your servants, so shall we do. We shall cross over armed before the Lord to the land of Canaan, and ours shall be the heritage of our inheritance across the Jordan. So Moses gave to them, to the children of Gad and the children of Reuben, and half the tribe of Manasseh, son of Joseph, the kingdom of Sihon, king of the Amorite, and the kingdom of Og, king of the Bashan, the land with its cities in the boundaries, and the cities of the surrounding land. The children of Gad built Dibon and Adaroth and Arir, and I'm sorry for the names, and Atroth Sophan and Jazer and Jog-Behihah and Beth
Don't worry
Nimrah,
about it.
yeah, and Beth Haran, fortified cities and pens for the flocks. The children of Reuben built Hezbon and yep, and the other one, and Nebo, and is that Baal Maon? That sounds like not a good name, with altered names. And Sibmah, and they called them by their other names instead of the names of the cities that they built. The children of Machir, son of Manasseh, went to Gilead and captured it, then drove out the Amorite who were in it. Moses gave the Gilead to Machir, son of Manasseh, and he settled in it. Jair, son of Manasseh, went and captured their villages and called them Havav Jair. Nobah went and captured Kenath and her suburbs and called it Nobah after his name.
Yeah, so basically, they close the deal and then they get Gilead. Well, there's something really strange about this reading, though, because if you look back on verse 33, where it says, "And Moses gave to them, to the children of God and the children of Reuben, and the half tribe of Manasseh." Where does Manasseh come into all this? They weren't even mentioned, and a lot of the modern commentators feel this is a common thing of the Bible, where they mix two stories together. And this was originally a story about the tribes of Reuben and Gad. There was another story about the tribe of Manasseh conquering some of this area, and they sort of blended the two stories together. The other odd thing is the Hebrew text reads Chatzi Shevet Manasseh, which can either be translated as half of the tribe of Manasseh or the half tribe of Manasseh. And there's a lot of argument among the rabbinic commentators which is which, because in a sense, Manasseh really is kind of a half tribe. If you remember back in Genesis, when Jacob is dying, he calls Joseph over to him and tells him to bring his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And he basically adopts both of them as his own sons on an equal par with his other sons. So instead of a tribe of Joseph, there's no tribe of Joseph. There are two tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim. So in a sense, Ephraim really is kind of a half tribe. It's half of what would have been the tribe of Joseph. But on the other hand, some of the commentators think that only half the tribe of Manasseh stayed on the east side of the Jordan, and the other half went on the other side. So there are basically two ways to interpret the passage. And then that
Could
actually
that have
takes
a
us to
geographic basis when we talk about half tribes? One group lived in one little area and another group lived in another area.
It looked like actually that the tribe of Manasseh did split, because if you see biblical atlases of where the tribes were, in ancient Canaan, Manasseh is on both sides of the Jordan in most of these maps. So apparently the tribe did split.
So was Manasseh known to be like really great Torah scholars or something? Because in the little subnote in my copy says that the Moses wanted outstanding Torah authorities to dwell with the relatively isolated two tribes and guide them. Any commentary on that? Because that seems strange.
Yeah. Well, I bet you've got the Art Scroll. Yeah, it's an Orthodox commentary, and they have some weird things, and they just sort of they invented the idea that the tribe of Manasseh for some reason were devoted to Torah study, and you can't say no, but there's no evidence in the Torah text itself, that suggests that. It's what they call midrash, stories
Yeah.
the rabbis just got to make up, if they want to illustrate a point. But that's obviously totally made up. There's no evidence that the tribe of Manasseh was special as far as Torah study. In fact, actually, the tribe of Manasseh is kind of interesting. You may remember again when Jacob adopts the two boys from Joseph, Manasseh, and Ephraim, he's going to bless them. And, he puts his hands on their heads. And the older son, who's Manasseh, should get the right hand, blessing. And so, since Jacob really is almost blind at this point, Joseph puts Manasseh at Jacob's right hand and Ephraim at his left. And the text says he crosses his hands so that he gives the blessing that it should go to the firstborn to Ephraim and not Manasseh. And Joseph says, wait a minute, Dad, you got this all mixed up. Manasseh's on your right-hand side. And Jacob says, no, I know what I'm doing. Manasseh's a good kid, but Ephraim is special. So, and actually, later on, after King Solomon died and the kingdom broke up, to Judah in the south and Samaria to the north, it was the tribe of Ephraim, that led the revolt against the house of David. Jeroboam, the first king of the northern kingdom, was a member of the tribe of Ephraim. And, they use that episode as a way of saying that they really have the right, to be the leading tribe in Israel, not the tribe of Judah.
Hmm.
A little extra color.
Yeah, because when you really think about it, Jacob always considered Rachel to be his real wife. He never really wanted to marry Leah, and so in a real sense, Joseph was really to Jacob his real firstborn. Reuben was the firstborn, but that was Leah's kid, and he never wanted Leah, in the first place. And Joseph was his real firstborn, Rachel's first child. And then again, Ephraim, in a sense, is the firstborn of Joseph because Jacob gives him the blessing of the firstborn. So the tribe of Ephraim really had a pretty good case to make, that they should be, the leading tribe. They should be the leaders in Israel. Not Judah, who's just the fourth son of Leah. He didn't have any special status. And so that was probably a grudge that went way back, in history. And that's sort of the end of that story with the end of chapter 32. And chapter 33 probably is one of the most boring chapters in the Bible because it is really, it's just a long, long list of all the places that the Israelites stopped, on their way through the desert. There are some interesting things in it, though. If somebody wants to read the first 6 verses of chapter 33.
Sure, I'll go ahead. These are the stages of the people of Israel when out of the land of Egypt by their companies under the leadership of Moses and Aaron. Moses wrote down their starting places stage by stage by command of the Lord, and these are their stages according to their starting places. They set out from Ramses in the first month of the 15th day of the first month. On the day after the Passover, the people of Israel went out triumphantly in the sight of all the Egyptians.
Go ahead and read the next couple of
Okay.
verses.
While the Egyptians were burying all of their firstborn, whom the Lord had struck down among them, on their gods also the Lord executed judgments.
What's interesting here is that God told Moses to write this down. I mean, it's the only mention, I think, anywhere in the Torah of God telling Moses to write something down. Um, and, of course, it's common to call the Torah the 5 books of Moses. That comes from a tradition that Moses actually wrote it, which very few modern scholars actually believe, because he would have had to describe his own death, to really have written the whole thing. But this is interesting. The only time God tells him to actually write something down. And the rest of it, it goes all the way through, the reading goes all the way through verse 49. It's just one place name after another. Most of them, the archaeologists have kind of used this to try to look for these places. And most of these names can't be identified. Nobody has any idea, where they really are. A few of them you can recognize because stuff happened there, previously in the Bible. Most of these names are just pop up for the first time, and we have no idea where they are. Because the one place everybody would like to know where it is Mount Sinai, and that's never been identified. Yeah, actually, in the 14th century, the church actually picked out a mountain in the Sinai Desert, and called it Mount Sinai. Because they wanted to encourage pilgrims to visit the Holy Land, and you have to have places to attract the tourists. So they kind of arbitrarily picked a mountain. There's actually, to this day, there's a monastery there called the Monastery of St. Catherine. It's in the Sinai Desert. And that was their idea of what Mount Sinai was. But actually, none of these places can really be identified with any certainty. And if you count them all up, there are actually 42 places that are listed. From the first place when they left Egypt all the way over to the last place on the banks of the Jordan. And so actually, they didn't really do that much moving around if you think about it, because this is 42 places in 40 years. So you assume most of the time was really spent in camp, rather than traveling.
Yeah, and that's what when I read all those places, and I don't have the feel that you do for the geography, but I kept thinking, well, it's not a matter of just packing up and walking, to a certain distance. You got to move all of these animals that you have, and all your household and children and all of this kind of stuff. So over this period of time, it's more a migration path, and where they say, let's stay here for a few days until
Mhm.
we're rested up and we get something to
Yeah,
eat, and then we'll go on.
yeah.
Is that kind of what that may represent?
Yeah, the guess is, they probably went from one oasis to another.
Yeah,
Because the main thing is the main need there is really water. They had manna, it was following them around, so they had food, but the main thing really was water. And so presumably these are places where there was water.
but they had to bring all their animals and everything with them.
Oh yeah, it must have been a very slow pace. I mean, they
Yeah,
had little children,
yeah,
plus the sanctuary that they built in the desert was like a huge circus tent. All
sure.
these poles and boards and curtains and whatnot. All that had to be taken down, packed up, and then hauled to the next place, and then the sanctuary was put up again. So a lot of that would have been just everyday chores.
Yeah, and it
But,
wasn't like wagon trains going to the West Coast. It
yeah.
was, kind of moving the whole community.
Yeah, you'd figure probably, at a walking pace, but with young children too, they would have been lucky to make 10 miles a day.
Yeah, yeah,
But
So
even at that, they did reach the Jordan initially in 2 years. And yeah, of those 2 years, remember Moses was up on Mount Sinai for 40 days and nights, getting the initial set of tablets, and then he
mhm,
smashed them, because of the golden calf. So he had to go up for another 40 days and 40 nights. So that's really, you're talking about 5 or 6 months right there,
sure.
just for that episode. And if you look at the details of the sanctuary, you've got to figure at least a few months, to put that sanctuary together, to make all that stuff and construct it. And so the actual travel time, for the first 2 years, the travel time was probably a year and a half or less. And that's all it took to get them from Egypt, to the banks of the Jordan. And
Yeah,
then they screwed up and they tacked 38 years on,
yeah,
to that. But that 38 years really was just wandering from one place to another, not
sure.
really going anywhere.
Well, and they've got to spin the yarn and make the clothing,
Mhm.
and like you say, put up their tents or whatever, and they got to make the tents and find tent poles and do all of that kind of stuff. It's not a forest that you can, readily harvest all that stuff, or it takes time to shear a sheep or goat or whatever they did to
Mhm.
so
make their.
speaking of goats and the flocks and everything, um,
Uh,
having I mean, I own goats and I know how much they eat on a regular basis.
yeah.
If they're staying in a spot for a year, there can't be
Mhm.
enough in the local area for that to sustain it. So
And
my
muddy.
and muddy, very muddy.
Yeah.
Um, and
Thank you, Rachel.
Right.
and so my question is, and this is nobody knows, so I'm just curious, did the goats and the other livestock, did they eat manna also? I mean, did they supplement or like what happened?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've never read any commentary on that. You're right. I mean,
Yeah.
you get the impression these people had sizable groups of animals, with
Yeah.
them. And it doesn't say what the animals ate or drank. You'd have to assume it was manna.
Mhm.
Who knows?
Inquiring
In
minds
fact,
want to know.
it's interesting that there is one place the cattle are mentioned, though. Back when Moses is told to talk to the rock, because the people don't have water, and God says, go with Aaron, talk to the rock, and I'll bring water out of for the
Right.
people and for their animals. The text actually mentioned and for your animals. And that's where Moses screws up and loses his temper and yells at the people and hits the rock. But the water comes out anyway, and the text says the people and the animals drank. So that's the one place it does mention the animals. But it's a good point. I guess you have to assume the
Yeah.
animals ate manna.
Yeah. And did they also have oxen or water buffalo? We know
Um,
there's sheep and
we don't
goats.
know. They just say herds. But if you look at the sacrifices, Leviticus is mostly about instructions for the sacrifices. And they talk about rams and ewes and oxen and bulls and
Mhm.
apparently and of course the other question, where did they get all this stuff? This is a bunch of escaping slaves. When you read about the details of making the sanctuary, everything is plated with gold and silver and copper and wrought in copper. The priests are all wearing these linen vestments and whatnot. And where's all this stuff coming from? Obviously, they don't get it in the middle of the Sinai Desert. And
No.
the only answer really that the rabbinic commentators have about this, there's one verse in Exodus, where it says God gave them favor in the eyes of the Egyptians. And so, they went to their neighbors and their neighbors gave them gold and silver and garments and all kinds of stuff. And so essentially they kind of looted the Egyptians, before they left. That's the only real explanation that you can really come up for it.
Oh, no, it's back wages.
Yeah, it's the first
Back
example of
wages.
reparations for
Yeah.
slavery. Yeah.
But they must have used some of those animals to haul some of this stuff.
Well, you assume that, yeah,
Yeah. Whether it was goats or oxen or what have you.
yeah. And again, the numbers that the Bible gives you really can't trust biblical numbers because you remember the book of Numbers starts off with the census, and the census is like 603,000 people. But this is only men from ages 20 to 50, ones who are fit for military service. And it doesn't count the tribe of Levi because the Levites are counted by themselves. So you figure if there's 603,000 men between the ages of 20 and 50, if there's an equal number of women, and what about all the children under
Yeah.
20 and the older people and the tribe of, you're talking about somewhere between 2 and 3 million people. And the idea of 2 to 3 million people milling around in the Sinai Desert, it's kind of a mind-boggling thing. It's hard to get
Yeah.
your head around.
Yeah. To borrow Rachel's statement about the muddy areas and all of that, you can
Yeah,
imagine what.
yeah. I mean, even today, with modern technology and whatnot, there's no way the Sinai Desert can support anywhere near two
Yeah.
million people. So you have to take biblical numbers with a huge chunk of salt. Okay.
I mean, for my industry, just the amount of water alone for 2 million people is a lot. That's a lot of water just for drinking.
Yeah,
That's not, washing and bathing and cooking.
yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, but numbers are like that through the whole Bible. You read about some battle, where 120,000 people died. And from everything we know about populations in the ancient Middle East, nobody had an army anywhere near that size. It really would have been an impossibility. Um, but apparently, it's not just the Bible. Apparently, ancient writers used to regularly simply pump up the numbers. I guess it maybe is to make the events, seem more important. We don't really know. For instance, the Roman historians, one of the great Roman military disasters was the Battle of Cannae, where Hannibal lured them into a trap, and supposedly 55,000 Romans died in one day, which again is kind of beyond rational belief. First of all, we don't think from the population that anybody ever had an army of 50,000 men to start with. And then how do you kill 50,000 men in one day? You don't have high explosives, you don't have automatic weapons. Every one of those guys has to be individually, stabbed or hacked to death. And it's really kind of impossible. but it's basically characteristic of ancient literature. Everybody pumps up the numbers. And the other thing was there are certain kind of magic numbers in the Bible. They get repeated over and over, like the 40 years in the desert. 40 just pops up all over the place. Moses is up on Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights. The 40 years in the desert. Moses is on Mount Sinai for 40 days and nights getting the law. If you look at the book of Judges, every time one of the judges defeats an enemy, there was peace in the land for 40 years, before the next episode. And it even goes into the New Testament, in the Gospels where Satan takes Jesus into the wilderness to tempt him.
Yeah.
It's your standard 40 days and 40 nights. And so for some reason, the number 40, just had some special significance for biblical writers. And we really don't know why it was. What was so special about 40?
Could it be as just an indicator of a lot of time?
It could be, actually, a lot of modern commentators believe that 40 really shouldn't be read literally as 40. It just means a lot. And when they say 40, it just means a lot of stuff, not necessarily 40. It was like these primitive tribes that can only count up to 5 or 7 or something, and anything past that is just a lot. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Fred,
anybody?
in near the end of verse 3, when John was
3.
reading, he said the Israelites started out triumphantly,
Mhm.
but the GPS uses the word defiantly.
Yeah, actually, neither one is a literal translation. The Hebrew is biyad ramah, which means yad hand, ramah elevated or high. They went out of Egypt with a high hand. Another, the impression I think they're trying to give is that they didn't sneak out. They weren't slinking out. They were proud of what God had done for them, and they showed it. They were kind of strutting when they went out. That's kind of a general sense of it.
Well, that would make sense for the word triumphantly. Defiantly is almost like they
Yeah.
reluctantly or were being pushed out at that point.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
use the
I
word
think
defiant.
joyfully, or there's a lot of ways to describe it. I like the poetry they use here. They went out literally with a high hand.
It's like with their heads held high.
Right, exactly. That would be the closest English to it, really, as far as the meaning. Okay. Actually, it gets much more interesting after this because starting next week we get into Deuteronomy, and that's a much better
Oh.
book. There aren't as many boring stretches in Deuteronomy. Like, let me give you the reading for next week, if anybody wants to.
Okay.
The next week, yeah. Let me just look at what the Torah reading is for August 10th.
I know we only do like a third right during services. I mean, I
Yeah,
couldn't imagine doing the whole thing. That'd be a long morning.
it's a long, yeah. Well, the Orthodox do that, and typically an Orthodox Saturday morning service will start about 9 or 9:30 and run through about 12:30 or 1.
I'd be hungry.
Yeah, they're very hungry by the time it's over. Also, they do a lot of things that we don't do in the conservative movement. Like, we say a Mishnah Barak, a prayer for healing for everyone who is sick in the congregation. But the Orthodox tradition is that everybody deserves their individual Mishnah Barak. And our Mishnah Barak list is usually like 25 or 30 people. We read this long list. And if you can imagine reciting an individual Mishnah Barak for every one of those 30 or 35 people. I mean, that's 45 minutes in itself right there. And everyone that gets called up to the Torah in an Orthodox congregation also gets an individual Mishnah Barak said for them. So, it's a long service. It really is. Let's see, for August 10th.
Speaking of that, Fred, what is happening to the numbers of the Orthodox?
Actually, they're increasing. They're the only group in the American Jewish community that actually is growing and increasing. But it's not because their ideology. It's not because other Jews are leaving conservative or reform congregations and going Orthodox. They just have a lot of kids. It's biology, not ideology. If you have 4 or 5 or 6 kids, your movement grows.
I mean, you're increasing your odds of your kids staying in the group. So yeah.
Exactly. A
Yep.
lot of these kids do rebel. But if you have 6 kids, 1 or 2 can rebel and leave the fold, and you still grow from generation to generation.
It's all about the numbers.
Yeah. In fact, the Orthodox claim, and there's some psychological backup for it, that actually the best way to raise kids is to have a lot of them. Because if you have 5 or 6 kids, you can't really hover over any one kid. You can't be a helicopter parent. If you have 1 or 2 kids, you can really focus on them, and drive them nuts, basically.
Unless you have a
If you
fleet
have
of
5 or
drones.
6 kids, yeah, you have to just let them be free range kids. You can't obsess about any one of your 6 kids. And it
Yeah.
may be healthier for the kids. Okay, the reading for next
Heard
week
it
is
that
gonna
way
be,
before.
anyway, the reading for next week. So it's going to be the book of Deuteronomy, and we're going to start with chapter 2, verse 2, and it goes through chapter 2, verse 30. So it's chapter 2, verse 2, and going through chapter 2, verse 30.
Okay.
There's a lot of good stuff in this. It's a relatively short reading, but there's a lot of good stuff in there.
Good.
Okay.
So see you guys next week.
right,
Okay,
thanks, Fred.
thank you,
Thanks, gang.
Fred.
See ya.
Thank you, Fred.
Good discussion, guys.
Fred.
Thank
Thanks, Fred.
See y'all.